I love the headers. They look hot, literally and figuratively.
I use the dried MIG powders. I mix a little bit of the rust and the black together, wipe it on with a Q-tip and rub it, and then don't touch it after that.
Yep.
It's an IPMS show, so we're going to see more than just cars.
The Hudson Valley Historical Miniatures Guild, or HVHMG for short. We do cars, planes, tanks, figures, ships, sci-fi. If it exists in scale, somebody in our club builds it.
Our late friend Greg Nichols always said this is the most important show to go to. I mean, he loved GSL, but he dragged me here one year and said, you can't go to the refrigerator and take the same thing out all the time. You want to look at new things. You want to try new things.
I'm surprised he didn't say NNL East.
Volume-wise, it's a huge show.
Yeah.
But the reason to come here is because you get to see all these different disciplines. He would take us all around, all the car guys, and say, look at this.
Quite the compliment.
Yeah.
It really is.
So I'm here with John Gallagher.
I am the chairman of the Hudson Valley Historical Miniatures Guild annual show. I've been doing this since 2007, and this is the 34th year of our show. In this table, you see the various classes of armor. Most of them are World War II, broken down into Axis and Ally. You also have ordnance, which are cannons and rockets and stuff of that nature. And this is the diorama category. The purpose of a diorama is to tell a story.
Cool.
Either make it up,
Yep.
or it's based on an actual event. And everything is judged. Whatever's there gets judged as a whole. This one's really nice. People like models that light up and make sound.
I'm here with Matt McKeeby. It's interesting because his stuff in all these different categories just struck me so much. And it was so cool that it turned out to be the same guy. So here's Matt.
A friend of mine who works for Micromark, he designs some of their HO scale buildings, and he told me that they were having a contest coming up with some of the buildings and asked me if I'd consider joining the contest. This started with just these wharf buildings back here, and I'm a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote a lot of weird fantasy, and I had also just painted this little guy who's by another producer, a French guy named Romain Van den Bogart. I had some old HO figures, and this was just sort of playing till I had the wharf designed. Octopus was all hand sculpted with Avi's epoxy. Since it's HO model scale, it was a switch house that I turned into a lighthouse and some vehicles. It's one of those pieces that I love, and it's too darn big to put anywhere.
Well, I was just going to ask, do you have it like on display at home?
Well, I'm a teacher. I teach high school, and I am fortunate to have a display case in my classroom at school.
This one, the refraction in the water really has that luminosity.
Well, yeah, water pieces have been really popular. If you follow internet modeling channels, there's a lot of people using resin, especially a lot of folks overseas. So I just really wanted to try doing a resin water piece, and I've always loved these amphibious vehicles. And the more I read about the GPA, I found out that the Russians ended up with most of our GPAs because we didn't like them. They didn't work very well. So that immediately gave me the thought of what if I had it sinking? That was the inspiration there, and I'm a big fan of Bill Malden, who did World War II era cartoons, and so I like that sense of humor of the whole thing. So Kit was a straightforward kind of build. Once I had done a base, I built dams with styrene and poured layer after layer of tinted resin till I got up to the vehicle level. And then I suspended the vehicle from the edge of the dams and kept pouring, and even put some inside to show that these guys are not really having the best of luck.
But they also have some guys like, I have spectators.
Oh yeah.
So cool.
Yeah, I was kind of imagining prep for D-Day in England, a couple of drunken Yanks. There is a case of beer back there who thought they would take it for a little spin. The Brits can't get enough. I don't know if they're helping, but they're taking a photo for sure.
In those layers, as you go lower, you don't see the layers, but you get a sense of some optical change. And that has a very liquid, kind of fluid, wavy look to it.
I'm glad it has that look, and I'm going to admit, they say the difference between a pro and an amateur is amateur points out his mistakes, but because I was learning to do this, I poured it in layers because you have to, let it dry, and I let it get a little too dry between layers. So there is a little bit of a striation, but when you look at it, it did have kind of a neat variegated effect, which I think serves it well. Just a lucky accident.
There's a lot.
My favorite was the water coming out of the bucket. That's a piece of clear sprue that I just heated up and crushed with pliers and glued it in. So edging in, it's getting worse and worse every minute.
We're used to like NNL East or any of the other shows where it's basically cars. What do you take away when you see
Tons.
these dioramas?
Tons.
I mean, it's a big...
Their techniques, leathering, stuff that we can use on cars.
Yeah.
Even though we may not build this genre, but let's face it, you really focusing on some of the detailing and some of the weathering techniques and the metal finishes. A lot of stuff that we can use on our cars.
Oh, yeah.
That's the takeaway I get. That's why we love coming here. We get to see different stuff. And these guys, their use of the powders, that's where I learned about the MIG powders, was from these guys years ago. You look at the stuff, it's amazing.
Over here, we have the various aircraft categories, large scale all the way to 1/72nd scale.
It's funny. Earlier we were talking about what we take away from the show. We're talking about what we learn from the military guys. I just bought a set of pipes from an airplane. I don't know what they are. I don't know what they're used for. But it's a beautiful machined piece of aluminum that comes to, it's flared, and I says, that's the perfect exhaust pipe for me.
Exactly.
And there it is. As many as there were, I just bought them all up. I'll give you a set later.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And again, it's an airplane part.
Over here we have the ship category. This we call the Triple Crown. To enter this, you enter 3 pieces of a different discipline. As you can see here, you've got armor, aircraft, and science.
Is that universal in IPMS, or is that...
I'm not sure. We base a lot of our categories on IPMS, so maybe it does.
This show is the only place I've seen this before, and I think it's a wonderful challenge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it really does test your skills. Over here we get into the science fiction. Sometimes they're made up, like that's made up. That's a scratch, not a scratch build kit, but they converted it to something sci-fi. And of course people recognize that. TIE Fighter.
It's a classic.
Moonbus from base 1999 with Mark Landau and his wife. Science fiction figures. My favorite category, right? These are the juniors.
Oh, yeah.
This is our future.
Yes, it is.
Okay, broken down into 2 categories, 13 to 17 and under 13. I wish there were more. It's still early.
How's the turnout?
We average between, over the last 10 years, between 50 and 60 modelers. I'm hoping we exceed that.
Oh, I would think so.
It looks like it, but I won't know until...
The tables are full. It's
Yes.
wonderful.
It is wonderful. Last week there was a show. It was called GraniteCon. And they had a 30%, I think he said 30% increase in attendees. And they went from average of 300. They averaged 300 modelers on the tables, but he said they got over 500.
Found this relic helmet on eBay, and I was just blown away by the rust patterning in the back. It clearly sat somewhere upside down, full of water, rusted out and soaked through. Feeling dramatic. I don't do a lot of World War I stuff, but the gas and the rats have always terrified me. Another metal kit from a country called Andrea. They're Spanish-based. It's a great kit. The body, the arms, and the head with the helmet, and then a few other accessories. A chunk of oak that I cut out and wired from the inside, and pink construction foam that you would get at Home Depot, paper mache celluclay for the earth scrap, wood for the revetment backing. Looking at some YouTube videos, I saw some modelers have been doing explosions using LED lights and cotton, and thought I'd give it a try. It makes a hell of a night light. In a dark room where you get the uplight from the glow, it looks creepy. It's fantastic.
We get into the figures and busts, which I find very fascinating because I've tried to paint figures before. It's not easy. Some of these are so well done, they look alive. Look at the shading. The shading on the muscles on the horse, the way the paint, the clothing has the shades, the folds, right? You can see it. It's really
Beautiful
well
shadowing
done.
and highlights that are somewhat placed by the room light, but also those shadows and highlights are painted in.
Yes. Another thing, when you're judging these things, you have to take into consideration the lighting. I do anyway.
Yeah.
If I were to judge that, I say
Even
take
the
into
color,
consideration. It probably looks a bit different on the bench when he was painting it than it is here. In the judging system for IPMS, it's pretty easy to go through all of the models and you only look at it once and you can tell. But when you get down to the ones, first, second, and third, that's when you really have to pay attention to the details. If you watch aircraft modelers, judges, they even get out little rulers and make sure that the wings are the same height off of the tabletop and stuff. That's how close it gets.
I will say, doing the judging, I've learned a lot of what I should be doing, and it's made my builds better. It really has, because I see there are some flaws, and it's like, oh, I'm doing that, I need to fix that. And I've learned how to get smoother paint with less orange peel, for example, that sort of thing.
This one's had a lot of attention.
I would probably put 90% of that attention based on the sculpt itself. The sculpt is just magnificent. That is by Post Militaire, a guy named Ray Lamb. I got one a few years ago and I was scared of it because it's so many pieces and it weighs an absolute ton. That's easily a 8 or 10 pound kit. It's white metal. It's high lead content white metal, so it is a heavy piece. It's built pretty much direct from the box. I work in acrylics for undercoats, and then for the shading I use oils over the top. The transparency of the oils gives you some nice variation in terms of being able to get that fade. The oils are particularly good for horses because you get that sort of glossy sheen that you see on a hot horse, and enamels for the metallics for this piece. I think I had a couple bottles of good old testers, the old silver and gold, that was what I used.
All the small components that are on there, how they're floating, you get the feeling of the horse
in motion.
Yeah, and the lightness of it just rising up.
Well, I'll tell you, the fatal flaw with that kit and a lot of those heavy metal kits is sag. They weigh so much that those horse legs, after a while, start leaning. And I, in fact, built the horse a number of years ago and put it in the cabinet because I chickened out. And when I opened the cabinet, it was listing to port about 15 degrees. So I actually had a lot of fun, not really, drilling out the three legs that have contact with the surface and running brass rod up and puttying it up. So hopefully that's not going to bend again. And that's not an exact period button, but that is the identical type of button that he would have worn on his uniforms. A little bit of the person in there. That's a cherry tree that we cut down in my yard.
Just a whole lot of history all put together.
Well, I started out as a kid just loving the Napoleonic uniforms. I can't believe that men got dressed up in these wool uniforms and went out and fought dressed like that.
Yeah.
Although this is more of a parade uniform. I think he's probably just showing off. I always imagined a young woman in the distance being impressed by his horsemanship.
You really have like a real mix of subject matter.
Well, that's, I think that's really interesting, and I build across genres. I'm not just an airplane, not just a figure, not just a diorama person. And I think that's the great thing about this hobby, because I can steal ideas from a car guy can steal ideas from me, and we can all make our work better.
When I was young and I started going to shows and things like that, I always asked my dad, kind of kidding around, why is it that only old guys win? And what he said was, it took them that long to get that good. And I'm 64, I'm nowhere near as good as where I want to be, and every day I'm learning something. I meet my friends, we share ideas, it's just a wonderful hobby. And things that we even do in our regular jobs. There are people that are machinists and painters and resin casters, and we learn those skills also. So it's just it's a very good connected community.
Well, I got to tell you, cars terrify me, because there's a right way to do it, and there's all those beautiful gloss finishes, and it's all right if you get a little dust or crud into that kind of mess, but when you get dust into your beautiful gloss or your candy apple paint, that's sad news.
Come hang around with us. We've got some good workarounds for that.
Excellent.